They thought it was an insult. They thought it was humiliation, wrapped in silence and delivered without warning. They thought it would break us. But when you leave 8,000 human babies on someone's doorstep, you don't understand humans at all. Before the story continues, if you enjoy slow burn sci-fi with a sharp HFY edge where humanity doesn't roar, but endures, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay with us, because this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about memory and what humans choose to remember. You wake to alarms that aren't yours. Not the shrill red ones that mean hull breach or orbital fire. No, these are softer, layered tones, cascading through the Terran diplomatic habitat like confused birds. The kind of alarm designed for anomaly, not disaster. By the time you reach the outer atrium, the floor is already crowded. 8,000 crypods. They're stacked with ceremonial precision, curved white polymer shells arranged in concentric arcs, each glowing faint blue. Each one marked with genetic seals, galactic registry stamps, and a single symbol burned into the metal like a brand, the crest of the Varelian Concord. You don't need a translator for that. Everyone knows that symbol. The Varelians are old, older than humanity's first cities, older than most of the council species. Tall, elegant, cold, they speak in long sentences and shorter truths. They pride themselves on efficiency, logic, and emotional restraint, and on one particular belief, that humans are sentimental to the point of weakness. You kneel beside the nearest pod. Inside, a baby sleeps. Human, no question. The genetic markers confirm it instantly. Baseline Terran genome, minor regional variation, nothing engineered. The child's chest rises and falls in a slow, peaceful rhythm, unaware of politics, unaware of insult, unaware of the impossible distance crossed to arrive here. 8,000 of them, abandoned, not discarded. No, the pods are pristine, power cells full, life support flawless. This was not neglect. This was a message. The Varelian communique arrives 12 minutes later, transmitted simultaneously to Earth, Luna, Mars, and every human diplomatic outpost. It's brief, cold, perfectly phrased. Asterisk, in accordance with Galactic Resource Reallocation Accord 7 Theta, the Concord returns surplus biological dependence to their origin species. Your kind breeds excessively. Consider this a courtesy. Asterisk, no threat, no apology. Just that. You watch the faces around you as the message scrolls past: diplomats, aides, medtechs, security officers. Some are pale, some are shaking. One woman sits down hard on the floor and starts laughing, a brittle sound that breaks into sobs halfway through. 8,000 babies, not clones, not grown, not weapons. Children taken from fringe colonies, transit stations, mixed species enclaves, gathered over years, cataloged and stored like excess cargo. Returned as an insult. The council chambers erupt within hours. The Varelian ambassador stands tall and unbothered, 4 eyes calm, hands folded behind their back. Humans, they say smoothly, you petitioned repeatedly for recognition of your reproductive autonomy. We simply honored your philosophy. You value every life. We ensured none were wasted. The word wasted echoes in the chamber. Human representatives don't shout. They don't threaten. They ask one question. Where did you get them? The Varelian pauses, just a fraction too long. From jurisdictions where your species demonstrated inadequate capacity for long-term dependent care. That's when Earth goes quiet. Not angry, quiet. 8,000 babies are distributed within 48 hours. Hospitals clear wings. Civilian transports reroute. People who never planned to have children apply for emergency guardianship without hesitation. Elderly couples, single mechanics, retired soldiers, artists, farmers, refugees who still remember what it means to be taken from somewhere without consent. You see it all from the command balcony of Habitat 7, watching shuttles lift off in steady lines, each carrying pods filled with soft-breathing and futures that should never have been bartered. No one asks why us. Humans already know. Weeks pass. The Council waits for outrage, for demands, for sanctions. They expect humans to scream. Instead, something else happens. The first thank you card arrives at the Varelian Embassy on Council Station. It's physical. Printed paper, an absurdity in a civilization that abandoned cellulose centuries ago. The envelope is simple, hand-addressed, sealed with a faintly crooked sticker of a smiling cartoon Earth. Inside, thank you for returning our daughter. We didn't know she was gone. We won't lose her again. No signature, just that. The Varelians are confused. Then another arrives, and another. Within days, stacks of them fill the reception hall. Different handwriting, different languages, some translated, some not. Thank you for trusting us with him. Thank you for bringing her home. Thank you for reminding us who we are. Some include pictures. A baby asleep on a chest. A tiny hand gripping a finger. A family that didn't exist a week ago. The Concord files a formal complaint. This behavior is inappropriate, the ambassador says. This was not a gift. Humanity's reply is delayed by 3 days. When it comes, it's a single line. We know. That's when the first Varelian analyst begins to panic, because insults don't get thank you notes, and weapons don't get named. Behind the scenes, something deeper is happening. Human archivists begin cross-referencing genetic logs. Medical historians dig into old missing persons databases. Patterns emerge. The babies weren't random. They were selected. Children of diplomats who died in border conflicts. Colonists declared lost during transit anomalies. Mixed species infants quietly removed from stations where humans had no legal claim. The Varelians didn't just return surplus. They returned the inconvenient, the ones no one would fight a war over. Except humans don't rank children that way. And the thank you cards keep coming. Thousands of them, each one polite, each one sincere, each one a reminder that humans do not forget those taken from them, even when they didn't know the theft had occurred. You stand at the edge of a nursery, watching a Varelian observer through the glass. They're tall, composed, and visibly unsettled. Why are you doing this? They finally ask. You don't look at them when you answer. Because you gave us something priceless. You say they stiffen. That was not our intent. You smile, soft, tired, unafraid. It never is. And somewhere, deep in Varelian space, a Concord think tank begins recalculating a fundamental assumption. That humanity measures value in power. They don't yet understand the truth. Humans measure value in who they refuse to abandon. And the story is only just beginning. The Varelians prided themselves on preparation, on modeling outcomes centuries in advance, on probability lattice so complex that entire civilizations trusted them more than instinct, more than history, more than memory. And yet no model accounted for gratitude weaponized by sincerity. The thank you cards did not stop. They multiplied. By the third week, the Varelian Embassy on Council Station requested permission to digitize the incoming correspondence. The request was denied, politely, firmly, by a human clerk who explained that physical delivery was important to the senders. So the cards kept arriving. Cargo drones rerouted. Postal barges queued. Entire docking rings smelled faintly of paper and ink, anachronistic and deeply uncomfortable to a species that had long abandoned both. Inside the embassy, the stacks reached shoulder height. Ambassador Sulith V. stood in the reception hall, 4 eyes tracking the slow mechanical sweep of an autosorter that had been installed without enthusiasm. Analyze content sentiment, they ordered. The AI hesitated, a rare thing for Concord software. Sentiment classification unstable, it replied. Messages express gratitude toward an action classified as hostile. Silith V felt something dangerously close to irritation. Reclassify hostility parameters. Unable. Human response does not align with known conflict escalation behaviors. That was the problem. Humans weren't escalating. They weren't de-escalating either. They were expanding. Across human space, the 8,000 children grew into their new lives with startling speed. Not physically. They were still infants, still fragile, but socially. They were named, not numbers. Not registry codes. Names. Some were given family names that hadn't been spoken in decades. Others were given entirely new ones, stitched together from hope and stubbornness. On Mars, a hydroponics engineer named Aisha named her adopted son Returned Light in Old Urdu, a private joke that made her cry every time she said it aloud. On Luna, a retired cargo pilot taught twins how to sleep through engine noise by humming old jump route shanties. On Earth, in cities already too crowded, people made room anyway, because humans always do. Council intelligence agencies began noticing something else. The children were remembered. Every adoption logged not just medical data, but story. Where the child had been found, who carried them off the shuttle, who held them first, who cried. Humans were building a record, a living one. The Varelians noticed when human media stopped calling it the return. They started calling it the homecoming. That change triggered alarms in places far from the council. In the quiet halls of the Concord Strategic Ethics Division, a junior analyst named Rel Tees stared at the screen longer than was professionally advisable. Supervisor, they said carefully. Humans are integrating this event into their cultural identity. The supervisor didn't look up. Expected. Minor morale rebound. No, Reltiz insisted. This isn't morale. This is anchoring. That got attention. What do you mean? Reltiz swallowed. They are teaching children born after the event about children born before it. They are treating this as historical continuity, not incident. The supervisor frowned. Clarify risk. If conflict occurs, Reltiz said, these children will not be collateral. They will be cause. That report was archived, flagged, ignored, until the first human ship arrived in Varelian space. It wasn't a warship. That fact alone unsettled the Border Patrol. The vessel was civilian class, unarmed, running open transponders, and broadcasting a message on every known frequency band. Not a demand, an invitation. Asterisk Terran Medical Exchange Vessel Open Hands requests docking permission. Purpose: pediatric follow-up care. All data will be shared freely. Asterisk the patrol commander blinked. Pediatric? What? The Open Hands carried no soldiers. It carried doctors, neonatal specialists, psychologists trained in early separation trauma, cultural liaisons fluent in Varelian tonal speech. They requested access to the Concord's child-holding facilities, the places where the babies had been kept. The request should have been denied. It wasn't. No one could quite articulate why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps guilt, though Varelians did not acknowledge such a concept. Perhaps it was the quiet terror of not understanding the enemy. Inside the facility, human doctors moved with reverence. They touched walls gently. They asked questions no one had ever thought to ask. How long were the lights kept dim? Were lullabies played? Who held them when they cried? The Varelian overseer answered stiffly. Physical needs were met. Emotional stimulation was deemed unnecessary. The human pediatrician closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she said something that the translator rendered with uncomfortable accuracy. Thank you for keeping them alive. Not despite. Not although. Thank you. That phrase echoed again. It followed the open hands home, where footage of the exchange went quietly viral. No outrage. No calls for vengeance. Just a shared understanding spreading through human space like gravity. They were not done. The second ship arrived a month later, then a third. Always unarmed. Always open. Always offering something. Medical supplies. Education exchanges. Historical archives, including uncomfortable ones, cataloging human failures with brutal honesty. The Varelians had never seen a species present its own scars as credentials. The Concord Council convened in emergency session. This is psychological warfare, one elder insisted. They seek moral dominance. Another shook their head slowly. No, they seek inclusion. Inclusion into what? The question hung unanswered, until Ambassador Silith VA spoke. Into memory. Silence. Silith VA continued, voice quieter now. We believed humans would retaliate because we framed this as loss. But humans are reframing it as return. We gave them a story that does not end. A junior delegate scoffed. Stories do not win wars. No, Silith V agreed. But they decide who fights. The next escalation wasn't military. It was legal. Human advocates submitted a motion to the Galactic Council, recognizing force-dependent relocation as a crime. The case studies were meticulous. 8,000 names. 8,000 life trajectories. Projected outcomes if left unreturned. Psychological damage models. Economic impact. Cultural erosion. The Varelians argued precedent. Humans argued responsibility. And quietly, dozens of smaller species watched. Because many of them had done similar things. And many of them had feared humans for far simpler reasons. The ruling took months. When it came, it was narrow, carefully worded, but irreversible. The motion passed. For the first time in galactic history, removing children, even legally, even humanely, was declared an act of aggression. The Concord abstained, publicly neutral, privately shaken. That night, Silith V returned to their quarters and opened one final card. It had arrived late, slipped between thousands. No images, no embellishment, just text. Asterisk, we forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because our children deserve a future without this weight. Asterisk, Silith VA sat very still. Forgiveness was not a Varelian concept. Debt was. And this was worse, because debts could be repaid. Forgiveness lingered. Across human space, the children slept. Some dreamed, some cried. Some reached for hands that were there. Humanity did not celebrate. They prepared, not fleets, not weapons, but institutions, laws, memories. They archived everything. Because one day, those children would ask where they came from. And humans intended to answer honestly, including the part where an ancient civilization tried to insult them, and accidentally reminded humanity of what it protects most fiercely. The Varelians would not understand the final consequence for years. Not until those children grew. Not until some of them wore uniforms. Not until others sat at negotiation tables. Not until one of them stood, calm and polite, across from a Concord delegate and smiled with unmistakable human warmth, and said, "We remember you." 26 years passed before the Concord understood what their mistake had cost them. Not territory, not fleets, but time. Because time, when shaped by humans, does not erode. It compounds. The children grew. Not together. They were scattered across worlds, cultures, gravity wells, but they were never separated from the story of how they arrived. Humans made sure of that. Not as a scar, not as a lesson in hatred, but as context. This is where you came from. This is who brought you home. This is why we choose differently. They called them the returned generation, not officially, not in law, but in the way humans name things that matter. Teachers referenced it. Archivists cross-indexed it. Artists painted it. Musicians wrote about it in quiet songs that didn't chart, but never disappeared. And always there were the cards. 8,000 of them, preserved in climate-controlled vaults on Earth, Luna, and Mars. Some were displayed publicly. Others were kept sealed, accessible only by request. Each child, when they turned 16, was given the option to read the ones connected to them. Not all chose to. Some did, and when they did, they rarely spoke about it afterward, because gratitude, once understood fully, is heavy. The Concord watched from afar. They saw humans prosper, not explosively, not violently, but durably. New alliances formed. Smaller species leaned closer. Trade routes adjusted subtly, favoring Terran space. Human diplomats were invited into rooms they had never been allowed to enter before, not because they were feared, because they were trusted. Trust, the Concord learned too late, was a strategic resource. The first return to enter public service was a woman named Elia Marino. She did not announce her origin. She did not need to. Her record spoke for itself. Crisis mediation on 3 border worlds. Humanitarian corridor negotiation during the Kesh famine. Author of the Dependent Sovereignty Accords, which quietly reshaped how multi-species families were treated under galactic law. When a junior aide finally asked her, off record, why she cared so much about children caught between systems, Elia paused. Then she said, simply, because someone once decided I was excess. The aide never asked again. Others followed. Some became engineers, designing evacuation ships that prioritized dependent safety. Some became economists, dismantling systems that monetized displacement. A few joined the military, not the aggressive branches, but logistics, rescue, and post-conflict reconstruction. And one joined the diplomatic corps. His name was Jonah Reed. The Concord would remember it. He was assigned as Earth's secondary delegate to a reconciliation summit, a low-stakes affair on paper. Trade harmonization, transit law updates. No mention of children. Silith VA was still ambassador. Older now, slower. They recognized Jonah immediately, not by face, by posture. Humans who had been abandoned carried themselves differently, not broken, anchored, like gravity had decided to keep them. The session proceeded normally until a Concord elder made a mistake. A casual remark. You humans remain unusually attached to your dependents. The room cooled. Jonah did not react immediately. He waited. Then he smiled. Not sharp. Not kind. Honest. With respect, he said. That attachment is why we're all still here. The elder bristled. Explain. Jonah folded his hands on the table. 26 years ago, your people left 8,000 human babies on our doorstep as an insult. A murmur rippled through the chamber. You expected anger. You expected retaliation. What you got was gratitude. He leaned forward slightly. What you didn't see was what gratitude builds. Silithve felt something cold settle in their core. Jonah continued. Those children grew up loved, supported, remembered, and because of that, they grew into adults who do not need to prove their worth through domination. He looked directly at the Concord delegation. We don't need revenge. We have continuity. The elder scoffed. You imply moral superiority. Jonah shook his head. No. Moral investment. Silence. Ben Jonah did something unexpected. He slid a physical object across the table. A card, old, edges worn soft. Read it, he said. Reluctantly, Silithve picked it up. The text was simple. Thank you for bringing me home. I will try to make the universe gentler than I found it. Silithve's translator hesitated on the last word. Gentler. There was no Virillian equivalent. The summit ended without incident, but something shifted. Within the year, the Concord revised internal policy on dependent relocation, not because of council pressure, but because junior officials began resigning rather than enforcing old protocols. Within 5 years, the Concord funded joint child care initiatives on mixed-species stations. Within 10, they formally acknowledged wrongdoing. Not publicly, not ceremonially, privately, in a message addressed not to Earth, but to the returned. Asterisk, we misjudged your species. We believed care was weakness. We were incorrect. Asterisk, humanity's response was not immediate. It never is. When it came, it was signed by thousands. No threats. No triumph. Just a single shared sentiment. Thank you for learning. History books would later argue about whether this was humanity's greatest victory. Some would say yes. Others would insist it wasn't a victory at all. Just an outcome. Because humans don't always win by conquering. Sometimes they win by refusing to let loss define them. 8,000 babies had once been used as an insult. Instead, they became proof that humanity's greatest strength was not its fleets, its technology, or its endurance. It was this: if you return what was taken, humans will remember. And if you harm what they love, they will too. The cards remain archived. The children are grown. And somewhere in Virillian space, a young Concord student studies a human phrase that still defies translation. Thank you. They are not sure why it feels like a warning.